On January 21st, at 8:47 a.m. Eastern Time, the President of the United States made a statement that barely registered outside of trade and policy circles. America does not need Canada. It wasn't shouted. It wasn't framed as a threat. It wasn't even delivered as a policy announcement. Most people heard it, scrolled past it, and assumed it was just another line in a long history of U.S. Canada trade rhetoric. That assumption is understandable. It is also wrong, because this wasn't a message meant for voters. It was a message aimed at systems. And systems don't respond to confidence, ideology, or political messaging. They respond to design, dependency, and timing. Stay with me, because the consequences of that statement do not show up in press conferences or headlines. They show up weeks later, in prices, shortages, and decisions made quietly by people who don't speak publicly at all. On the surface, the claim sounds plausible. The United States is the world's largest economy. It has vast agricultural output. It has domestic energy production. It has manufacturing capacity and capital markets unmatched by any other country. From that perspective, Canada can appear optional, a close partner, but not a necessity. That interpretation feels intuitive. It is also structurally incorrect, because modern economies do not function on national strength alone. They function on integration. And the U.S.-Canada relationship is not a traditional trade partnership. It is an operational system that has been running continuously for more than 3 decades. Many American industries are no longer designed to function independently. They are designed to function together with Canadian inputs. Removing those inputs doesn't create flexibility. It creates friction. And friction in systems doesn't announce itself immediately. It compounds. Start with energy, because this is where the "we don't need Canada" assumption collapses first. The United States imports roughly 4 million barrels of crude oil per day from Canada. That is more than the next several foreign suppliers combined. This is not generic oil. Canadian crude is heavier and chemically different from much of U.S. shale oil. Over decades, American refineries, especially in the Midwest and Gulf Coast, were specifically engineered to process Canadian crude efficiently. These refineries are not adaptable on short timelines. They cannot simply switch inputs without expensive retrofitting, reduced throughput, or temporary shutdowns. If Canadian supply is disrupted, these facilities don't adjust. They operate below capacity, and refinery output determines gasoline prices, diesel availability for trucking and agriculture, jet fuel for aviation. This is not theoretical. Past disruptions to Canadian supply have produced measurable regional fuel price spikes within days, not months. Energy is not optional infrastructure. It is the first pressure point. Now layer in electricity. Canada supplies the vast majority of U.S. electricity imports, primarily hydroelectric power flowing into northern states like New York, Michigan, Minnesota, and throughout New England. These grids were not designed with Canadian electricity as emergency backup. They were designed with it as baseload stability. When demand surges during heat waves or winter storms, Canadian hydro fills gaps that domestic generation cannot ramp up fast enough to meet. Remove that supply and utilities don't issue dramatic warnings. They quietly raise rates, implement load management, delay maintenance. Consumers feel it later, in bills, not headlines. This is how system stress actually appears. Now move beyond energy. American manufacturing is deeply intertwined with Canadian production at every stage. Automotive components cross the U.S.-Canada border multiple times during production. Parts are designed in one country, stamped in another, assembled in a third facility, and finished back in the United States. These supply chains were optimized over decades for cost, speed, and reliability. They are not modular. If Canadian inputs slow or become unreliable, assembly lines pause. Inventory buffers evaporate. Delivery schedules break. Manufacturers don't announce this publicly. They renegotiate contracts, delay orders, and quietly raise prices. The effects show up months later in vehicle prices, equipment delays, and reduced output. This is not a political reaction. It is a logistical one. Here is how this unfolds in real time. A political or trade rupture limits Canadian inputs. Energy and electricity costs rise regionally. Manufacturing absorbs higher costs and delays. Transportation passes costs downstream. Consumers see price increases without understanding the source. There is no single dramatic moment, just accumulation. And once accumulation passes a threshold, it becomes difficult to reverse. Here is the contradiction that sits at the center of this moment. American leaders speak about independence, sovereignty, and self-sufficiency. But the systems that make American life affordable were built on interdependence, deliberately, efficiently, and profitably. You can change rhetoric overnight. You cannot unwind 30 years of integrated infrastructure on command. The system does not respond to declarations. It responds to constraints. This does not stop at the U.S. Canada border. When supply chains destabilize, investment decisions change. Companies choose where to build new facilities based on reliability, not nationalism. Allies pay attention to how easily partnerships are dismissed. Trust, once weakened, does not automatically return. The longer uncertainty persists, the more businesses plan around it rather than waiting for it to resolve. If this assumption continues, the first signs will not be political. Watch. Midwest fuel prices diverging from national averages. Utility rate increases in northern states. Manufacturing maintenance delays. Quiet sourcing shifts toward less stable suppliers. These indicators matter more than speeches. The idea that America does not need Canada sounds strong. But systems don't respond to strength. They respond to design. And the design of North American infrastructure tells a different story, one that cannot be negotiated away through statements or posture. Something will adjust. The only unanswered question is where the cost will land. Do you think this relationship stabilizes quietly, or are we watching the beginning of a structural break that can't be undone?